Megan, and do a quick introduction of you. So it's a real pleasure to have everyone here again with us this morning. As many of you know, we take a couple of months during the summer to feature the really good work that our GreenCorps members are doing for us out there. And this morning we are going to hear from Megan Reich, a 2021-2022 Minnesota GreenCorps member who has been doing awesome work with our We Are Water Minnesota program. And she's going to be, as you can see from her title slide, she's going to talk about her accomplishments and the mission of the We Are Water Minnesota program as a traveling exhibit and strengthening the relationships between people and water. She's going to share her experiences about facilitating workshops, coordinating those events, and talking about creating multimedia content over the past year for that program. Megan is currently serving, as I said, with Minnesota GreenCorps with the MPCA, and she's completing an MA in Science Writing degree from Johns Hopkins University, and she is interested, as she writes, in strengthening relationships between humans, non-humans, and place through community-centered storytelling. Megan, it's great to have you with us. Why don't you take it away, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Mark, for that intro. I'm happy to be here today and share about my experience with the We Are Water program this past year. So I just want to start off, and I know some of the previous presentations members shared a bit about GreenCorps, but I wanted to start off with a quick overview of the Minnesota GreenCorps program for those of you who aren't familiar. So Minnesota GreenCorps is an AmeriCorps program. It's coordinated by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and it's focused on environmental work and training essentially a new generation of environmental professionals. So us members, we serve an 11-month term, full-time hours, September through August, and we're placed at different host sites throughout the state, and those host sites really vary. They include everywhere from nonprofits to school districts to cities and government institutions. And there's a variety of work that we do. Some people are more focused on air pollutant reduction or green infrastructure or waste reduction or community outreach, and I'm in that community outreach topic area. And each year, host sites can apply and be selected through a competitive process to have a GreenCorps member. So just to share a little bit about myself, I know Mark already spoke a bit to my bio, but I have a background in both biology and music. I grew up in Oregon. I went to the University of Puget Sound in Washington, and then I moved here to Minnesota about 4 years ago to pursue a master's in music performance. I graduated from that in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, and decided to take a turn into environmental communication, which is something that I've always been interested in. And I suppose the central theme that bridges my two interests is listening. So I like to think about what happens when we listen to each other, what happens when we listen to the natural world, and how do we change when that happens? I like to think of listening as a practice of engagement and as something that lies at both the heart of art and science. And I say this because We Are Water really embraces this theme of listening to people's stories across disciplines to help connect us to the natural world, water in particular. So We Are Water Minnesota, if you're not familiar with it, it is a traveling exhibit that emphasizes people's relationships with and our stewardship of water, specifically in the state of Minnesota. And we focus on how people can engage with water through different ways of knowing. So not only through science, but through history, through spirituality, through personal story. And the overarching goal of all of this is to help build capacity within each community that the exhibit visits to really support and engage in protection of our cherished water resources. We are funded by Minnesota's Clean Water Lands and Legacy Amendment, and our network is made up of a number of different partners. That includes not only the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, but the Minnesota Humanities Center, the Minnesota Historical Society, University of Minnesota Extension, as well as the Minnesota Departments of Health, Agriculture, and Natural Resources. So there's a team of us that's all bringing different perspectives together, and that is a source of support for the communities that host the We Are Water exhibit. So it's not only just about the exhibit, we also really try to emphasize the importance of building local networks of people who protect and affect water in the communities that the exhibit visits. And part of the ways that We Are Water does that is through different public programming that the host community helps put on, as well as We Are Water itself, and through my service as a GreenCorps member. So just to kind of visualize this network of relationships I've been talking about, we have the state level partners like here as the central support, and then host site communities. And these red dots are the partnerships that they're either forming or strengthening in their community. And something that's really rewarding that we hear from different host communities around the state is just the different collaborations and opportunities that come up over this shared value of water during the time that they have the exhibit, and in the many years beyond that as well. We Are Water has been around for several years now. We're currently in the midst of our 2022 tour. The exhibit is currently in Alexandria, so we're about halfway through. And with so many different places that the exhibit has been to, you really see that each place has its own unique relationship with water, and it has its own water stories. So to give you a short crash course, if you will, into some of the main themes of We Are Water, there's all sorts of information in the exhibit, but if you were to come into the exhibit and I was to give you a quick preview of some of the themes you could explore, these are the ones that I might share with you. So the first is We Are Water, of course, the title of our program. And this is all about the fact that we relate to water from the level of very local and personal knowledge. We're literally made up of water, to the water in the place we live, and that we all have different relationships with water. The second theme here, How's the Water, really gets to the fact that here in Minnesota, we are the headwaters. We're at the headwaters of 3 major North American water basins. So our waters go to the Gulf of Mexico, the Hudson Bay, and the Atlantic Ocean. And as many of you know, because of this, what we do really matters downstream. It has important implications. And currently, about 40% of Minnesota waters are polluted. So that's an important issue that we need to recognize, even though compared to many other places, we have really abundant and healthy waters. That doesn't mean that there are things to improve. And so the exhibit really tries to bring out the multitudes of ways that each of us, wherever we work, whatever background we come from, we can help improve the health of our waters in different ways. And the third theme really emphasizes that people can change water, and what we can do matters. So following from that second theme, and of course we can change water for better or for worse. And different people have different access to what they can change and how they are affected by water. Of course, something we're hearing a lot right now is how climate change is impacting different people in different ways, and often the most disadvantaged are bearing the heaviest consequences of that. And then I also say here that the flow of water can connect or divide. Water can be a boundary or a bridge, and we try to emphasize through our exhibit that we can kind of overcome those differences and recognize where not only where we interact with water differently, but where ultimately we share common value in water. Oops. So I've mentioned story a couple times so far, and the story really lies at the heart of We Are Water Minnesota's work. It's normal to think of an education or outreach program as maybe a conduit for people to receive knowledge in a one-way flow of information from source to receiver, but We Are Water Minnesota tries to challenge that notion by highlighting that the water stories of people who live in the community the exhibit is visiting also provide valuable knowledge. And when there's different opportunities in the museum where people can share their own stories. And a water story can be many different things. It could be a memory that a person has about water, a belief, a lesson learned, experiential knowledge, professional knowledge. And all of these different water stories give listeners different lenses to see water through. It's fascinating to me how water in itself can be many things, right? It can be a molecule, it can be a source of life, it can be a resource for industry, a destroyer, a healer, even a relative, and all of these meanings can reflect and inform how we choose to engage with water in our own daily lives. So that's what We Are Water Minnesota tries to get at. And these four lines that you see here are the principles that make up an approach called the absent narratives approach that the Minnesota Humanities Center uses in their work, and which We Are Water Minnesota builds off of too. And to just kind of mention these because they're really important in the work we do, and I think have implications in any work that any of us may be doing with water otherwise. Is just to go through these. The first being building and strengthening relationships. So the idea that when all of our stories are shared and listened to and understood as essential, we build those foundations for longer lasting partnerships. And then that leads into recognizing the power of story and the danger of absence. So something that We Are Water challenges itself and its host communities to ask is, whose experiences are being represented here, whose are not, and why? And then how can we welcome those normally unheard or undervalued voices into the conversations that we have about water in our communities? And that leads us to learning from and with multiple voices. So as opposed to learning about communities, which is more like knowing the who, what, where, when about a place, we can instead learn from and with communities. So that means examining our own ways of being and then accepting that other ways of being that we hear may be true as well. And just listening to each other's water stories can be one way of doing this. And then lastly, all of this leads into amplifying community solutions for change. So after we've established or started building some of those relationships through stories, through sharing with each other, how can we incorporate those understandings into action, into long-term change in our community, and ask that big question of what we want our water future to look like. And that water future is going to be a different vision for each community as well. So before I share more about some of the specific activities from my service term, I want to kind of immerse us into a bit of what it's like to actually listen and discuss these water stories. So I'm going to share here two different water stories. Both of these are from different host communities that the We Are Water exhibit has visited this past year. This first one is from Chalimar Martinez from Winona. And this story is about her move from Puerto Rico to Winona, and she talks about her challenge and survival after experiencing Hurricane Maria. And so as you listen to this story, which I will share, there is a translator, so don't be alarmed when you hear a different language at first. I invite you to reflect on the question of how has water moved you? Thinking about how water physically moved Chalimar and how it may have physically or mentally or emotionally moved you in different ways. So if you maybe wait for just a moment, I'm going to go ahead and share a different screen so I can play the audio here.
Fuimos impactados por el huracán María.
Yeah, that's one of the things that reminds me of water when we were hit by the Hurricane Maria.
Porque yo estaba ahí en Puerto Rico fue hace 4 años
Because
atrás.
I was there in Puerto Rico and that was 4 years back.
Y como el huracán cuando impactó perdimos todo.
And when the hurricane hit, we lost everything.
So teníamos que ir a los ríos y a los manantiales a buscar agua.
So we had to go to like the rivers and the groins of water to grab water for ourselves.
Todos los días.
Every day. ¿Y cuánto tiempo duraste ahí?
Yo estuve 4 meses.
I was there for 4 months after that.
Después, como yo di a luz 7 días después del huracán.
And I gave birth 7 days after the hurricane.
So, habíamos perdido nuestra casa y todo, so, estábamos viviendo en nuestro auto o en casa de familiares.
And so we lost everything, so we were living in our car or in relatives' housing.
Y como estaba mi bebé recién nacido, más tengo otros 3 niños.
And I had a newborn that was just born, and then I had 3 other kids on the side.
So decidimos venirnos a los Estados Unidos.
That's why we decided to move to the United States.
Es bien diferente a lo que estaba acostumbrada.
Very different to what I was used to.
Porque en 2 horas yo podía recorrer la isla completa.
Because over there, in 2 hours, I could go and run around, basically go through the whole island in 2 hours and cross it.
Ir a la playa todo el año.
And there was beach year round.
Y podía ir a los ríos, lagos.
And I could go to the rivers, the lakes.
No había nieve.
There wasn't any snow.
Y pues aquí me gusta.
And here I like it.
Porque tiene mucha naturaleza y me
There's
acuerda
a
un
lot
poco
of
a Puerto
nature,
Rico.
and it reminds me a bit of Puerto Rico.
Pero sí extraño la playa.
But I do miss the beach.
Y la comida.
And the food.
Y los ríos.
And the rivers.
Porque había muchas cascadas que uno podía ir.
Because there was a lot of waterfalls that we could go to.
All right, so thank you for taking the time to listen to that. I think it's really interesting just hearing about how different a water is in the 2 places she has lived, and that can be a conversation opener for how water is different across the state, as well as if people have experienced water in different places throughout their lives. So I'm going to share one more story before we move on. This is a story from Amy Sunderland from Alexandria, and she talks about as a child sitting on the lake shore and talking about how time moves really slowly in this experience, and then compares it to a different sense of time when watching tornadoes along similar lake shores. And as you listen to this story, I invite you to ponder on the question, how does being with water make you feel? And is this perhaps connected to a specific memory? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen once more.
He was born and grew up in Alexandria, and I moved back in semi-retirement, and now we have our permanent home on Lake Ida. I don't know if it's triggered by a photograph, but it is my favorite photograph. I'm sitting at the water's edge with my mom. I'm a baby, just sort of playing in the water, and the water is clear and the sand is nice. And I know that as children, we would just sit in the water for long time. And, I think one of the things, as people relate to nature and early memories is that it's slow time. It's something to savor because it's sort of happening and gently unfolding all the time, when we're enjoying it leisurely. I suppose we also have storm stories too, but I remember standing we'd go out on the dock and watch tornadoes come down the lake. And we were little, and my grandfather would do that with us. And my mother didn't think it was a great idea, but there was something about being able to read the skies of what was happening. So we could see the skies turn to yellow and, dark gray. And then we watched tornadoes move down the lake, and they did. And it kind of, was of course, a very dangerous thing, but it also sort of taught a respect and a sense of being alert and watching out for danger.
So those were just two examples of the many water stories that We Are Water has gathered over the years. If you're curious about these and would like to explore more, we actually have a story map that's available online on the We Are Water Minnesota website, which is connected to the Humanities Center. So I might try to share a link with you all when I have a chance. For now, though, I want to share a little bit about some of the programs and activities I've been helping with as a GreenCorps member this past year. So there were three main areas of my service, and that included leading stewardship activities in each different host site, facilitating different trainings and workshops, as well as creating content that supported We Are Water Minnesota. And I'll be going through kind of each of these briefly and highlighting some projects in the following slides. I do want to note, though, before I venture too off from the stories, that if you do explore those on your own time, I encourage you to pause in your own meetings with your colleagues and share your own water stories with one another. I think as water professionals, it can be really important to reflect on why we're doing the work that we're doing, and could be revitalizing and help connect us on a more personal level to each other and the work that we do. So to get into some of these stewardship activities that I helped with, there were three different activities that I offered to the We Are Water host sites, and they had the option of choosing one or multiple depending on what their interests and needs were. The first one I'm going to share here is a Smart Salting for Local Leaders workshop. This was a workshop developed as an additional offering to the MPCA's existing collection of smart salting trainings. And this one, it was specifically targeted for elected officials and local decision makers to learn about some of those impacts that chloride has on infrastructure and the environment, and also share specific action steps and policy changes that they can make to help with chloride reduction in their communities. And kind of that area, sharing those specific action steps and policy changes, was sort of a gap in the current offerings from the MPCA's Smart Salting program. And the goal of this was to not only reach a new audience, but develop something that could be eventually added into the existing cohort of smart salting offerings. And I worked with Brooke along the way, which was she was a valuable resource, and we were able to co-host several different workshops with different groups. We did a first run in collaboration with Green Step Cities, and then we brought it to City of Winona, Dakota County, and we will be doing a couple more co-hosted with Alexandria's Sanitary District and the City of Rochester. So part of the challenge of developing this workshop was, first of all, from my perspective, entering into a new issue. I knew nothing about the issue of chloride in Minnesota, so learning about it, then condensing information from longer, more technical trainings into something that was more approachable for an audience that was maybe not interested in, say, how to actually apply winter salt effectively, like as a maintenance person. And so that process for me involved reaching out and getting in contact with different chloride reduction stakeholders throughout the state and hearing about what they would hope for in a class like this, as well as what insight they've gained through their own chloride reduction advocacy. I put on just a practice pilot run with that group of stakeholders, and they provided some excellent feedback, and that helped me develop the workshop from there. It was honestly difficult to really get to the target audience we were hoping to get to. For our first few workshops, it was a lot of our audience were coming from groups that, you know, would normally attend some of our other workshops, like the property managers workshop. And so over time, we kind of collaborated with the different hosts to help them reach out to different groups in the area, as well as changing the messaging and making it more specific, more clear, and really narrowing in on that group. And I think we've had some improvements, and I look forward to continuing to help with the future of this workshop. Another activity that I helped coordinate were some nitrate well water testing clinics. So these were free drop-in nitrate testing clinics for private well users. I collaborated with Jen Schaus from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture to put these on. The Department of Ag provided the equipment, the initial training on how to use it. We ended up hosting 3 different clinics, one in Winona at the Historical Society, which was where the exhibit was located, one in Lake City at the Lake Pepin Legacy Alliance's Kernza Fest, which was a festival all about water healthy agriculture innovations. That was kind of their big culminating We Are Water program. For that one, we had the opportunity to collaborate with some members of the Minnesota Well Owners Organization, and we had someone from the Olmsted County Water Lab join us. And so it was really rewarding to put together those collaborations and coordinate on how we could each offer something that would add up to an experience that not only provided private well users with more information, but also gave them next steps, gave them support as well. And the last stewardship activity that I coordinated was a waterway cleanup. We only ended up having one of these in Winona, and similar to the nitrate clinics, what I enjoyed the most about these was just putting together a collaborative team that could each offer something to make it a more impactful event overall. And so for this one, I was able to bring in a couple volunteers from a local Isaac Walton League chapter, and they provided some stream water monitoring demos. We had a biology professor from St. Mary's University of Minnesota collaborate with us, and lots of students came to the event. And I also was able to connect with our Minnesota GreenCorps member over at Freshwater Society, who's been helping with their Adopt a River program, and she was able to provide us with a toolkit and kind of an execution plan for the event. And it was really rewarding to see it all come together, to see people from different areas of the community who had different connections to each of our collaborators. And I think we all agreed that we felt a desire to keep coming back and doing these cleanups. One challenge of not only this event, but many of the events I helped coordinate was offering these opportunities in communities that I was not living in. I didn't want to make it something where I just came and offered something and then left. I wanted to make sure that I was actually connecting with people throughout the whole process and really getting to know the place as best I could, especially in the case of this cleanup where we actually needed to scope out a physical location and need. and then offer either further resources or pathways for people to take next steps from there. So I also put on a series of different trainings that I'll mention briefly. So something new that we tried this year with the We Are Water program was encouraging host communities to have docent volunteers be in the exhibit to help guide or interact with visitors. And we have had volunteers in the past, but what I helped offer was a training event at the beginning of each exhibit hosting period so that those volunteers could be comfortable. I helped develop updated docent handbooks that they used for engaging with visitors. And I also helped update an educator handbook with some supplemental activities to go with the exhibit. And each host community was different. They had different number of volunteers, different levels of interest, different backgrounds they were coming from. And so something that I had to learn was just adjusting to what those different needs and expectations they had were, and offering the resources that could be most supportive to them, whether it was more logistical help with scheduling, what times volunteers would be working, to actually providing tips. So that was a lot of fun to be a part of. Another really fun activity that I got to learn about and host some trainings on was the water bar. Some of you may have heard about the water bar before, and it's a separate group. Shania Madison and some other partners helped develop it, and Shania was actually able to come to our Winona host site retreat and give us all a little training, and each host community got their own water bar kit. So essentially the water bar is a water taste testing game and a conversation starter. So we have samples of water from 3 different sources that can vary depending on where you are, and participants get to taste each different water, and the water tender, as we call it, will ask questions like, which one do you like the most? What is the water that you drink? And essentially try to open up conversations about what water means to a person, what why drinking water is important to them, what issues or concerns they have about that. And we integrated one water bar into the Lake City nitrate clinic and kind of used it as a segue that visitors would go to after getting their water tested. They would go to the water bar area, and we had a couple well owner organization people there who are, really experts on everything well water, who got to essentially be there not only for the activity, but help answer more in-depth questions about their well water that Jen and I couldn't answer. So that was really fun, and it's been great to see more of the host communities finding creative ways to integrate the water bar into their programming. I also, as a pairing to some of the stewardship activities, offered several different workshops. So these were generally hour to hour and a half events that were held in places like libraries, places like youth programs, even in schools. And I developed 3 different workshops for different audiences. That first one there, The Ways Water Moves, is based off of a Project Wet curriculum activity that teaches kids about the water cycle. And I was able to bring that to a variety of different events. There, that bottom photo there is a event that Alexandria at the Legacy of Lakes Museum recently hosted called Just Add Water. But I set up as a station, and kids could go and explore that. And then on a contrasting end for Dakota County, I brought it in as just a classroom activity for several classrooms of 4th graders. And then I also developed a water story sharing workshop. So really utilizing that audio content that you got a taste of earlier, and developing a series of reflective prompts and group exercises to draw out people's personal experiences and explore what it means to connect with water in different ways. And then lastly, helped with develop a writing workshop with water. So in this workshop, we worked on some various writing prompts, shared with each other, and listened to stories as well. With these, I found that attendance was generally low, but the people who came to them were very engaged and curious, and we often had some really insightful conversations that started, and I learned so much about the areas just being there. And it was really rewarding in that sense. That the upper left picture is me at the St. Charles Library, a bit west of Winona, doing a story sharing workshop. And then that one to the right is another picture of the water cycle activity. So for the last chunk of service related activities I'm going to share with you has been kind of the content develop that I've been helping with. So the We Are Water exhibit, about 70% of it stays the same from a host site to host site, but about 30% of it, we develop different local content. We have a local panel that highlights different water challenges, interesting features, efforts. And then we also have an inspiration stories panel, which is that one you see at the bottom right there. And that highlights 5 or 6 people in the area who have acted as water stewards in whatever way that can mean, because that can be many different things, right? So I had the opportunity to write those inspiration stories for the different host sites we visited, using some of the interviews that our story gatherer brought to us. And then I also helped develop some of the audio story features. So if you look in that upper right picture, you see that panel with those 4 buttons. Those are 4 different stories, like those ones that you listened to earlier, that we feature from people in the local community. And then on the screen there, people can explore the whole map of the whole state if they want to. And then social media has been a big part of my service as well. I've been the main manager contributor to the content that goes up on We Are Water Minnesota's 2 social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter. And so it's been fun to try and find a mix of communicating to people about our program and its values, highlighting the programming and the work that our host sites are putting into the exhibit, as well as sharing educational moments and also sharing resources and partners who are doing work that we want to highlight as a program. And then another thing that I've really enjoyed working on is contributing to We Are Water Minnesota's podcast, The Watershed. So last tour, We Are Water Minnesota had an intern who helped create several podcast episodes for one of their host sites. I believe it was Mankato. And so with the start of my service term, I had the opportunity of creating episodes that were centered on the stories of each different host community that We Are Water visited. So I got to, from the kind of trove of audio interviews that we collected, pull out themes and highlight moments, and then weave my own commentary around those water stories and try to create a sonic space where people can reflect a little deeper on those stories in a guided way. And it's been a great additional resource for host sites. And in some cases, we've had school groups use them for their classrooms. And it's my hope that it's helped expand We Are Water's reach as well and touch some of those people where the exhibit is not currently located. And then as a Minnesota GreenCorps, something that's really cool about our service term is that we have the opportunity to use civic engagement hours and essentially volunteer on whatever projects we would like to. that are relevant to environmental work, even if it's not connected to the work of our host site. So something that I was involved in throughout the year was volunteering with the Cedar Lake Park Association at Cedar Lake in Minneapolis, pulling invasive species, a lot of buckthorn, and then doing some native seeding work, and did it with several other GreenCorps members. So it was really fun to connect with them in that way, and to learn more about this location that I love to visit and contribute in a more meaningful way. And more broadly, it's been really rewarding to collaborate with other Minnesota GreenCorps members and find opportunities where our service can benefit one another's projects. One of the groups that I really collaborated with a lot throughout my term was the 2 GreenCorps members serving with Get the Lead Out Minnesota, which is also at the Pollution Control Agency. But we found opportunities to table together at the exhibit opening ceremonies, which is what you can see in that lower picture there. Me with Tori from Get the Lead Out at Winona. That's actually the mayor of Winona right there next to us. And then collaborating on social media messaging. And I'm going to be releasing a podcast episode too with one of the project coordinators with Get the Lead Out. So it's just been fun to kind of boost each other's work in that way. As GreenCorps members, we also have a set amount of training hours that we can use for different things. So one thing I did with that was become certified in Project What, which is a water education program. And then I also helped out a lot with our communications committee. So this year, the GreenCorps program started something new. They had different committees. So they had a recruitment committee, communications committee, member support and resources committee. So that was a good opportunity for me to kind of continue getting experience in social media in that way. So wrapping things up a little bit here, I just want to highlight again just the network of support that I felt like I had as a Minnesota GreenCorps member, from my awesome supervisor, Brett Gaines, to the GreenCorps program staff, to my fellow members. There was such a sense of community that I felt, even though us GreenCorps members were separated by distance in many ways. I also appreciated the opportunity there was to practice leadership and to have my ideas welcomed and considered, and to be part of conversations with people who have been doing water work for years, and to feel like my contributions were valued in that space. I also, I think, really gained insight into just the value of service and the connection with others that creates, and how that connection then fosters resiliency. And moving forward in my career, I really want to find ways to continue to cultivate partnerships and creative collaborations with others, in whatever form that may take. And so, yeah, just closing thoughts. We have a lot more work to do in terms of the ways that we steward our waters. We have a lot more progress to make, and restoration that is still calling to be had, but I think it's equally important to recognize and celebrate what we do have. And I see We Are Water Minnesota doing that, and and that's something that we don't always take the time for, but I think that celebration of our connections with water helps us build that resiliency that we need to continue stepping up to serve as stewards for what sustains us. So thank you all for listening today. I'd like to open up the rest of the space for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Megan, for agreeing to be here with us today and to share your work. It was great to work with you. So I got to learn a little bit, although I didn't get to learn a lot about the other work you were doing with We Are Water. So it was really fun to learn a little bit more about all of the other great work that you were doing. So if anybody has questions for Megan, you can unmute yourself and just ask them. Or you can put it in the chat if you're more comfortable with that, but I like to hear everybody's voice too. I think that's nice. So if you guys do have questions.
Actually, I
I
wanted
can
to get it
say that
started.
without Megan, we would not have created this new workshop for the Smart Salting program. We just, as I'm sure all of you can appreciate as well, resources are tight. We all have a lot of work to do, and it would definitely not be possible. And she just did an amazing job with pulling that information together, adjusting, adapting, changing it kind of as we learned from each pilot that we hosted. So I am very grateful to have had the opportunity to work with Megan, and wish we could keep her, but I'm sure she's going to be off to hopefully a great future in environmental work.
Thanks, Brooke.
So what questions do we have? Mark?
One of the questions I have, just to kind of going, if people want to take a little time to put their questions in the chat. What are the areas in your work over the past year that you felt maybe were the most effective in communicating with, the public and the people you came in contact with? Looking back, what were those things that really seemed to stand out in terms of those effective connections?
Yeah, honestly, it was the moments where I was having like one-on-one, like hands-on interactions with people. So being at the nitrate clinics and having people hand their water to you, like, there's a lot of trust that goes into that. And asking them about their water, and then telling them about what options they have, or telling them about what it means to have nitrate in your groundwater, and to see those light bulb moments come up. Another one was, surprisingly, I think, interacting with kids. Like, I've never been like somebody who admittedly enjoys working with kids, but we did a few like classroom tours and water cycle workshops, and even though it could be challenging to get kids engaged, like when you see them like really getting into something and like super interested, it feels impactful, because you know that you don't know whether that's a fleeting interest or not, but just seeing how enthusiastic they are about something was rewarding. Yeah, I think throughout my term I engage with people in quite a variety of ways, in like degrees of distance. Probably like the podcast felt the most creatively rewarding, but I really don't know what the impact of that was on individuals. And so something that, I wonder about moving forward is how with those types of communication platforms where we are intimately connecting with people, but like, across more degrees of separation, how can we create opportunities for not only for feedback, but for people to share about how they're responding.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's really interesting that maybe you felt some of the most effective work was dealing with some of the children that you came in contact with. I mean, that's interesting observation. I'm kind of wondering too, having gone through this, with the insight that you've gained, maybe what you might do different with it going forward. I mean, what kind of improvements or changes do you think might be effective, or maybe get across those messages and engagement in even better ways?
So I guess this is connected to some of the challenges that host communities expressed as well, in addition to just my work, but it takes a lot of time to form relationships. And oftentimes I feel like in situations where we struggle with attendance in events like the water workshops, I felt sort of a block in terms of how can I get people to learn about this and feel like they're welcome in this space, especially, those people who might have those stories that we normally don't hear. And I think, yeah, a question I'd like to just continue asking is how in community engagement work can we ask the people like what they are looking for more rather than just bringing opportunities to them. And that's difficult because when I was developing these workshops, I didn't know the communities I was bringing them to, but I wonder if I could reverse that process if I were to do a similar project in the future to shape the programs around each community more.
We did have a hand up from MPCA Collaboration, so I'm not sure who that is, but if you would like to go ahead and unmute yourself, you are welcome to just go ahead now and ask Megan your question or make whatever comment you have.
Well, hi, it's me, Paul Gardner. I'm not sure why it says MPCA Collaboration. That's what we use for our hosting on WebEx for the Clean Water Council. Megan, I enjoyed working with you on the smart salting training. A lot of us who are older are adjusting to this new normal where we're maybe in the office and maybe at home or a little bit of both. And you're starting out, and when I met you, you were in a cube with your mask on and you're kind of working events and kind of in the office. And I'm just wondering if you feel that there's anything missing about your work experience because we're not all in the same place.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think with We Are Water, it's interesting because our state level partners are all working in different places. So Britt, my supervisor, was really my only other We Are Water colleague that was also with the MPCA, and she was also at the office. So I think to some extent, the We Are Water program has like always been working with this dynamic of connecting with, across virtual space in different ways.
Or is it the rest of us who need to catch up with where you are?
No, I'm just reflecting on this. I think it's interesting because in some cases, the virtual format actually worked better for certain activities. Like I'm actually thinking of the smart salting for local leaders, just because a lot of that audience doesn't have the time or capacity to go to an in-person event. So I think one thing that this strange time has maybe helped given us insight into is like thinking more flexibility about, well, what format like actually works better in this dynamic and which one doesn't. That being said, there were still blocks and like across our state partners, like different individuals had like different levels of comfort or ability to meet in person. Like we had someone from the Minnesota Department of Health who really couldn't go to anything as more of us were going to in-person events. And so as we continue to like live and work in this type of dynamic, I think, hybrid situations are challenging. And so I think it's important to keep thinking about how we can make different events equally accessible in different ways.
And I also appreciate that, like me, you do not have a background in the sciences and you have something to contribute to this work that we do with a different perspective. So thank you for all your work.
Yeah.
Signing off.
I turned on my camera to comment. It's really fun to see Megan's whole contributions put together into a presentation. Good job, Megan. And building off of Paul's comment, I just think about like we have a lot of time where we're independently working and separated, but then we also have these really intense times where we travel on a road trip together and we're talking about our lives and being at an in-person event. And so I actually think that helps all of the in-between time when we are remote because we have pretty deep relationships with like Megan and I, but then also across the state partners who are doing this work. So it's this funny combination of like sort of intensely face-to-face and then remote. And another comment about the support that Megan received is that this, like I was sort of the umbrella supervisor, but there was really big support from the Department of Agriculture partner and from Brooke and from several of our other state partners. And so just sharing that mentorship and sharing the direction of the work and shaping that, I think worked really well in providing Megan with like a rich experience and not just my perspective, but like a really good team collaborating together. So thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments? It is 10 o'clock, so I'm sure folks gotta jump off to their next meeting, but if there is any last comments or questions. If not, I just want to thank you again, Megan, for your time and sharing your work with all of us. I really do enjoy learning from all of the great work that the GreenCorps members do every year. It's exciting to just hear all the different activities you all get to do and the impact. I mean, that is, I think, something that I have really appreciated more since we've started hearing from more of you, is just the wonderful impact that these GreenCorps members who are only with communities for 11 months really do have that are long lasting. So Megan's impact on the Smart Salting program will hopefully be permanent. This will be a workshop that we will be able to hopefully continue to offer into the future. And so it's a really great program. And I hope those of you who maybe don't interact with the GreenCorps program, I encourage you to reach out to Candace or other GreenCorps staff and volunteer to be a mentor and be more deeply involved with these GreenCorps members, because it gives us too an opportunity to get a new perspective and some new ideas that we aren't getting in our regular work. So thank you, Megan, for not only your time today but also your service, and thank you everybody for taking time out of your day to learn about Megan's work.
Thank you.
Nice presentation, Megan. The slides were great, and I learned a lot, I think, just like everybody else. So, nice job. So, in another couple of weeks, our next presenter will be a final presentation, I think, from another GreenCorps member, Sadie Newman, I think. Brooke is going to join us from the city of Rochester and tell us about the work she's been doing there.
Should be another great presentation, so looking forward to that. So we'll see you guys all in a couple of weeks.
Thanks again, Megan.
Bye.